Hi, everyone. This show, I could not just wait till I click the go live button because this is actually a very special show for me. Today marks exactly 1 year since the industry icon analyst uh, Paul Greenberg handed over the keys to the show to me. So today, I think we'll use this milestone for today's theme, which is the evolution of analyst relations, moving from the corporate backroom to the boardroom today. Uh, the Especially, I love the engagement that I get, whether you're watching this show live or you're watching it later. A lot of people reach out, comment, and also ask questions to the panelists. I think in the past 12 months, if you watch the early episodes, you'll see some of the episodes where like people like Sean Rogers, Sneha Kapoor broke down analyst frameworks. And just recently, I think if you had watched the last show, which was in April, Mary McCowan and Tim Banting challenged companies to strip away the corporate jargon. So today's show will also talk about some of these ideas. I also wanted to give a shout out to Sonia Vargas uh, from Databricks. She was my first guest, along with Vijay Bruce Daly, almost in May 2025. I would shout out to everybody else who's been on this show. Today we have two very special guests. I'm really happy that Erin Singleton, who's Global Head of Industry Analyst Relations at Adobe, will be our first guest. She'll talk about her journey to analyst relations and give us a lot of insights into how she has succeeded. The second guest is Melody Brue. Again, I've met both of them at conferences in real life, which really adds to the excitement for today's show. She's a VP and Principal Analyst for Modern at and she's also at Moor Insights and Strategy. So she's been a CMO too, so it'll be a very interesting conversation with her as well. So with that, let me bring in our first guest. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Erin Singleton.
Hi,
Hey,
Shashi,
Erin.
how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you for having me.
No, it's really been good. I was so happy that I could bring you on the show after having known you for, gosh, maybe a few years, but having heard of you much before. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about where you're joining us from?
Yeah, so Erin Singleton, I head up the analyst relations team for Adobe. I've been working for Adobe about 22 years, which if you had asked me when I was interviewing for the company years ago, if I was going to still be here this many years later, I would have been very surprised. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Very nice. I'm sure it's nice and sunny there, unlike the DC area. And I always forget to introduce myself. So I'm Shashi Belamkonda. My day job is an analyst at the Infotech Research Group. Been in technology for over 20 years, and I live in the Washington D.C. area. I want to kick off this conversation, Erin, with your 2 decades of leading and elevating analyst relations, plus your current role directing global AR at an enterprise company like Adobe. Share a bit more about your journey, like what made you choose this profession, what are some milestones, some early experiences, and how you today manage such a large group and such a large scale at Adobe.
Yeah, so like a lot of analyst relations professionals, I actually started in public relations. That's where I got my start, and easily made the transition to AR. Maybe after about 10 or 15 years of doing PR, and there's a lot of similarities, which folks watching can relate to. It's a lot of relationship building. I just found it to be so much more, satisfying to me, from a job standpoint, just the relationships that you can build with the analysts. It's deeper, and there's more of a strategic nature to it that really drew me to it. And then, yeah, I've been with Adobe quite a long time, as I said. I took over managing the team about 5 years ago when my former manager retired. And, Adobe's one of those companies where it's just constantly evolving. And so it's never felt stale. It's never felt like the same job. It feels like we're constantly evolving and changing. And, the technologies and the categories that we're in continue to evolve. And it's just been really exciting.
Very nice, Erin. And that's like, I would call you an OG because not many people can say that they've been at a company for so long plus in this space. I also believe like good communicators can thrive and survive because of the ability to take a message, like I like to say, from geek to English, right?
Right.
Yeah, not everybody needs a high technology filled language. Now, with that, let me ask you a question about the high volume of market noise that's there. Every software company is trying to push out new narratives. How do you think about that? What should a company be doing to ensure that the narrative captures and holds the attention of analysts?
I mean, a lot of this is the brass tacks that we all grew up doing, right? In AR, I mean, it's again about building those relationships and making sure that you are, front and center with the analysts that you should care about. And when I say that, I mean, who are the analysts that are influencing the deals? Who are the analysts that are influencing the buyer decisions? So making sure that you're sort of front and center with them. I think with AI, it's interesting because things are evolving pretty quickly, as everyone knows, right? And so I'm finding that there's a need to also make sure we're partnering with our marketing teams around how are we showing up? What's the visibility within these new LLM search engines? And so, what are the analysts' reports? What's the analyst content that's showing up and that's giving you a voice?
That's true. And also, like Adobe, obviously global company. I mean, I remember Cold Fusion.
I used to work on that product. I used to support that product.
I mean, interesting story. Like everybody should be a lifelong learner, and I would say like what has helped me in my career is mainly sometimes going back to college. So I went to the local community college. That's where I learned Cold Fusion and things like that. So that has also helped me in my career while moving to Infotech too. You are a global company. What are some cultural aspects and regional nuances that people should be thinking about when they manage AR across various countries and international markets?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when it comes to global, it's basically balancing consistency with flexibility, right? So you absolutely need a clear, consistent core narrative, but how that shows up, in different regions often needs to flex a bit based on local market dynamics or buyer expectations, and even how analysts engage in those regions. I also think listening becomes even more important globally, right? So you can't assume the same approach works everywhere. But I do think it's all grounded in sort of a clear central strategy, but sort of having that local awareness to make it relevant in those different markets. So like we know in Europe right now, regulation is very top of mind. So how are we supporting our regional teams to make sure that there's messaging for the analyst that addresses that?
That's true. In previous conversations, like what we heard from analyst relations folks outside of the US is the perception sometimes is analysts in Asia may actually be more like I'm going to use the word consultants, but more like confessionals to say like, hey, what should we be doing? Which probably applies a little bit to the rest of the world as well. But there may be either they don't understand the space very clearly, or they understand the space so much that they constantly interact with influence. So you're right, like it's different, and you need to look at the local nuances. One question that we haven't, yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Shashi, I think the other thing too is, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but analysts these days, in the last decade or so, I mean, they're global in nature. So it doesn't really matter in some cases where they're located. They could be in Europe, they could be in APJ, but they have a global remit too.
That's true. On that note, what has been an evolution of analyst relations that you've seen even in the past few years, even if we don't go back far enough? And I'll give you an example. Like as a CMO of startups, I didn't understand analyst relations. I would not spend on that in the budget. Retrospectively, I think that was a big mistake. That's also because of two reasons that I think, especially with AI, analyst content gets rated very highly simply because it's neutral, it's well thought out, longer notes and things like that. So, I mean, changes like this that you may have seen, what would you like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we talked about in the beginning, a lot of analyst relations, excuse me, is about managing relationships, right? I mean, making sure that you have built a relationship and that the analysts who cover your categories, your spaces, understand your company and understand your differentiators. And that's still important, and that's never going to go away. But I do think that AR is continuing to evolve, and it's becoming more of an influence and intelligence function. So it's not just about managing external relationships, but it's about helping the company understand the market and making better decisions. I think also at the same time, and you and I were talking about this earlier, right? The ecosystem is getting more complex, right? So the traditional analyst firms still matter a lot, especially for enterprise decisions, for enterprise buyers, but there's a broader set of voices that are also influencing perception. And so I think AR has to be much more focused in how it sort of prioritizes and how it engages across that landscape. And
That's
AI
true.
is a piece of this too, right? I mean, AI is changing everybody's job function. We're being told at Adobe to embrace AI from bottoms up. Everyone's being asked to experiment with AI, use AI, leverage AI. And so that landscape of how are we using AI within our own organization? What are the AI tools that we're offering as a vendor? But then how are the analyst firms using AI? It's all really pushing AR to evolve with it.
That's true. I think I'm really surprised at the amount of time it has saved for research versus looking at a lot of papers. That's really true. I mean, if somebody wanted to join this profession today, what advice would you have for them? Why should they join? What's good about this profession? And maybe even a little bit from your end, an opinion to like companies that don't have an AR function too. So there are two parts of this question. What is your opinion? Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people earlier in their careers, I'd say AR is a great place to learn how a business really works because it sits at the intersection of product, marketing, strategy, and sales. And so, it's not, again, just about managing analyst relationships, but focusing on understanding the market and how your company fits into it. The more you can connect analyst insight to actual decisions in the business, the more valuable that role becomes. And then just building the fundamentals, right? Clear communication, synthesis of the insights, relationship building, those go a long way in AR. And I'm sorry, what was your second question? What was the second part of your question?
Actually, the second part of the question, and I'll extend the question a little bit. The second part of the question is, if a company doesn't have an analyst relations
Oh, right.
function, how do we tell them, like, hey, you're missing out on something?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think a lot of executives connect AR with just like, oh, there's a magic quadrant, or there's a Forrester wave, or some other kind of big report. We want to be in that. How do we get in that? And so maybe that can become kind of the door opener for AR. But I think, credibility with executives starts when, AR can clearly, you can tie to business outcomes. So showing how AR is helping shape market perception or improving positioning in key categories. And then, ultimately how it supports pipeline and deal cycles, it becomes much more relevant. So I think sometimes that can be an uphill battle, right? It can become hard to prove, but it's starting with small things. Maybe it's, again, like carving out a space in a category that exists, and how do you get, into that magic quadrant or wave. Sometimes it can be things like, if LLM search is really, really important to your executives, which it is to mine, what are some of the ways to show that analyst research, user reviews, similar content like that is visible and is making you visible as a company, and therefore AR is needed as a function to support that.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Erin. One question that I keep getting, and I also want to introduce, maybe I'll ask the question first and introduce the second part. A lot of analyst relations professionals are finding it difficult while trying to get a deep executive buy-in, for engaging with analysts. What would you recommend to them in how do they overcome those challenges, and how do they make it better for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be a challenge at any company, right? Is getting executives to carve out the time to spend with analysts. Sometimes it can be working with if you do have a contract with a Gartner, Forrester, or other firm, working with your account teams to set up some proof of concept conversations at the highest level. One of the things that I've been pushing my team on is, again, excuse me, we're really good at the relationship building and the category influence, right? Working with those sort of vendor evaluation level of analysts. But what's that level of analysts kind of above that are a little bit more strategic at the business level? They're looking at companies go to market, or helping understand buyer behavior. Those are the kinds of things that executives are interested in. So if you can connect the dots there, and really help understand the insights that an analyst can provide that are deeper than what's just in the published research, right? You all are having conversations with our customers, and a company may have a customer listening program, so they're hearing from customers too, but oftentimes those customers are happy customers. What about the customers that aren't so happy, right? And interestingly enough, analysts are often hearing from those unhappy customers because the customer calls them up to say, I need advice. So if you can get kind of insights into what are the things that are causing pain points for your customers in aggregate through those analyst conversations, I found that that's been really successful in getting executives to sort of pay attention.
That's true. We talked about this a little bit before the show, but I think some of the previous guests have talked about something called a no agenda calls, which is like building relationships with analysts by having just calls, getting to know them. When I
Yeah.
myself have benefited a lot with, like we talked about my across the country road trip, where a lot of AR and analysts gave me tips about where to stop and how to do. So there's a personal aspect to this too.
Yeah.
What's your advice in building relationship with analysts? And I also want to bring up what we discussed very briefly is like, do you approach analysts more, or do you expect analysts to approach? I mean, not specifically to you, but in
Right.
general, like what should AR professionals be doing? Should there be a constant a feed of people who are coming new, maybe like you mentioned there are new firms and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the first part of your questions or question, we keep coming back to this idea of relationships, right? I mean, getting to know these analysts is important, right? They have families, they have lives, they have personal interests. And I think if you can kind of get to know analysts in a deeper level, AR and the analyst community is a tight-knit community. I think we all know each other. We all, like to peer network and get ideas from one another and share ideas and best practices. And it's the same with the analysts too. I mean, I've gotten to know analysts really, really well over the years and share Christmas cards and go to holiday parties. And it's a great community of people. And so I think that's really important. In terms of sort of the ever expanding set of analysts that are out there that exist, I mean, we do have to prioritize. And that can be tough, right? How do you make those decisions? How do you decide? But I've really been pushing my team to say no sometimes. We can't say yes to everything. We have a pretty decent sized team, but by some standards, it's not big enough. By other standards, maybe it is. But the focus should be on prioritizing the growth and business priority areas of the business, right? So we can't participate in every vendor eval. We can't engage with every single firm that comes across our path. So it's about looking at which ones are influencing the buyer, which ones are influencing awareness and visibility in the categories in the markets that we care about. So, Adobe's very large enterprise. We're very focused on customer experience. Marketing CMOs are our buyer. So we may not spend as much time with an analyst firm that doesn't sort of influence that space. And those are just choices that we sometimes have to make.
That's true. So bandwidth, obviously, plus prioritization. So yeah, that's good. What have been some ways that you have found that are successful that you'd like others to, take note of in building relationship with analysts?
I think, again, it's getting to know the analysts, not just them personally, but also what are they writing about? What are their hot buttons? It's not always possible, but if you can spend time with an analyst via advisory, I highly recommend it. It's a terrific way to sort of get deeper insights, again, on what they're hearing from customers, what they're writing about. I mean, I think one of the first things you learn, AR 101, is like, only 30% of what an analyst knows is in their written research. So how do you get at that other 70%? I think that goes a long way towards building those relationships, right? Is spending the time with them, digging into what they know.
That's true. Usually I have a lot of people commenting, but sometimes the platform that we use doesn't surface the comments till then. But if anybody wants to ask Erin questions, she's going to be here for some more time, and we'll bring her back. With that, I want to move on to the next. But thank you, Erin, for answering all these questions, and we'll bring you back in a little while. And that was very interesting, especially having Erin's time to talk about analyst relations from the beginning to how she has succeeded and her advice to others. I want to bring another special guest on to this anniversary episode. Melody Brue, I've met her many times. We cross paths. A very wonderful person to know. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Melody Brue.
Hi.
So good to see you. How are you doing?
Great. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. I loved listening to Erin. She's one of my favorites. And yeah, excited to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have both of you on the show today. Especially, it's a special thing that I finished 1 year of hosting this show.
Wow.
But Melody,
congratulations.
You have a very interesting background, the CMO turned analyst. So tell us a little bit, introduce yourself, give the community a feel of who you are, and also your journey to becoming an analyst.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, Melody Brue, I'm with Moor Insights Strategy. I've been at the firm for a little over 5 years now. And I cover a broad range of things, but I guess in general, we could just kind of categorize it as enterprise applications, and that includes UCaaS, CCaaS, and Adobe as well, some MarTech stack, some HCM. And yeah, as you said, I'm a former CMO, and that's actually something that's pretty consistent across the Moor Insights Strategy team, is that we've all been in former positions, either leading product or product management, marketing, lots of various different backgrounds in the firm, but none of us are actually what we would refer to as sort of a lifer analyst. And nothing wrong with being a lifer analyst at all. There's lots of great ones out there. But I think what it does is gives us kind of a unique view of the companies that we cover, and also more importantly, the decisions that executives are making, because we've had to make those decisions. We've had to make those purchases. We understand the process behind it, and we understand the stakes that it takes, and kind of living with our decisions. And so bringing that lens into this sort of market intelligence umbrella, I think is a bit unique for us as a firm, but certainly has helped shape how I approach things as an analyst, having been a CMO, certainly in terms of the tools that I need to use to be successful, kind of the buying process and what that takes for somebody who actually doesn't always write the checks, but has to convince the person writing the checks. What do they need to know? What's going to make them comfortable? What's the load on IT here? So that's just kind of how I approach things. But yeah, listening to Erin, I agree with so many things that she said about diving deep, having those relationships, really kind of almost becoming sort of part of the team, but also with this really broad view of seeing the rest of the industry, because we have kind of that bird's eye view.
That's true. Oh, that's really great. Give me a little bit, give our audience a little bit of an indication of how you've seen analyst relations evolve over the past few years, or even before that. There have been so many changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things happening that I've noticed. I mean, certainly AI is making things move faster. And so quarterly briefings, or even, once every 6 months to a year briefings, no longer work because things are changing so quickly. So from the analyst perspective, we have to keep up on a lot of things very quickly. From the AR team's perspective, that means a more, I would say, like a faster cadence of briefings, and it's a lot for them to keep as many analysts as as cover their space updated. And doing so requires not just like sending press releases. I've always said that I think like early and often is the best way to deal with analysts. And I think that's even more so now with just the speed of things and the velocity with AI and agentic. And then the other thing that I think that has changed really over the last couple of years is that AI governance and responsible deployment of AI are really becoming core evaluation criteria. So we're no longer just looking at capabilities. And so enterprise buyers, and so of course the analysts advising them, have to ask the harder questions about model governance, bias, explainability, ROI, accountability. So really that's just adding, I think, a layer that's really important to analyst work. And then I would say that, the rise of independent and boutique analysts is really kind of fragmenting that influence. It used to be the big analyst firms, but now this smaller firms, independent voices, people who are posting on LinkedIn and their own Substacks and whatever, that really, a lot of these analysts have a lot of influence. We might be smaller firms, but we have quite a big megaphone. And so for the AR people, that really means that they need to build to broader, and like Erin was saying, more relationship-centric programs that stay relevant across that full landscape, not just the inquiries from the big firms.
Great insights. I think one of the things that I actually thought I'm trying to persuade more companies to do at least a quarterly briefing, but you're absolutely right that quarterly isn't enough anymore, which leads to, a lot of times after a conference, I will talk to, some of the people, and my feedback to them is usually exactly what you just said, like you need to add more people because of bandwidth and how the things have changed. So that's these are really good points. I'm going to steal the points about how the business looks at analysts in a very different way. And sometimes I hear other analysts say like, hey, we want to help the buyers not make the mistakes we made during our career. So
Yes.
that's another advantage of experience, right? So from an analyst viewpoint, and I think we both exchanged some notes on LinkedIn on this, from the other side of the table, what are some actions that a company can take to establish a productive relationship with analysts?
So it has to really be a two-way conversation. And a lot of, I would say one mistake that some analyst relations teams do is they feed information, but they're not asking for feedback. And that feedback part of it is so important. Is I think if you look at really good analyst relations, it's not just a single placement or ranking, or it's really about routing that analyst input to their teams, and investing between events. Like you said, you're at events and you talk to people and you get a lot of great information, but there has to be a balance of pre-event. And this is a challenge, I think, for AR teams, is that we want information pre-event, but then you don't want it to be the exact same information. So you have the same information for a pre-briefing than you have for the executive Q&A, and then for the the keynote and the analyst events. So really good teams find a way to give you enough to be prepared for the event, and maybe even do some pre-writing and things, but then give different experiences throughout the event that isn't just a repeat of what was told. So, and I think keeping that relationship alive between those formal touch points is really important.
That's true. What about technology? Obviously, I do mean AI, but much more than AI. Like, in your opinion, has that changed the dynamic, or has it made it much better? Is there much better flow of information? What are your thoughts on technology in general, especially in the context of analyst relations and analysts?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it go a couple of ways. There's some like AR Insights that has a really great portal for all of the analysts' materials, but not every vendor uses them. But I love to be able to go there, especially some of the updates that they've made recently, just to be able to search and find the information that I'm looking for, and not have to search through email and find everything. And there's more content easily available. I also think that, and that doesn't have to exist on a particular portal. Some vendors have their own portals for that, but really being able to consolidate all of that information that analysts need into one spot is really great. I also, we're all using like AI summaries, and the analyst relations teams are sending out decks and recordings. So then we can use AI to query that information to, figure out what parts of it we need and what parts of it we can leave, because there's an overload of information. So we really have to be selective about what we're taking in as well. I think that I've seen some really interesting things recently. Vendors sending summaries, not just press releases. I really don't love to just get a press release. First of all, it's not always in the language that I think analysts want to see. It's a little bit more marketing fluff, and but some really good AR teams are turning that into briefs, like what you need to know, why this is important, how you can learn more, who to contact if you want to speak to somebody. Here are some customer references. So I think that the technology around analyst relations it's very similar to what we're using in our regular workflows, but good AR teams are using it really well to make the best use of our time. And that includes things like calendar invites. I don't know if you have this same thing, but if I go to an event that's 2 or 3 days long and I get sent just a PDF of my schedule, that creates a whole lot of work for me. But if I get sent calendar invites for every event or every meeting, one-on-one keynote and everything, that really helps like ease that. Now we've built internal tools that we can use to populate our calendars. But if somebody is just on top of that and does it and makes that one trip or that one event even easier, that's really helpful. So I'm sure that they're using lots of other technologies in the ways of like trying to figure out who to brief on what we're covering, how much we've written, all of that. But certainly you can tell that the teams that are leaning into that technology and making sure that we have access to the information that we need when we need it. And that's super helpful.
Really great insights, especially the one about keep the information in one place so that you can go and refer to it.
Yes.
I like the calendar. I mean, it may seem such a small thing, but it's actually a very big thing. I can also see like single person analyst relations teams. I've heard somebody had to do like 40 calendar invites, but I think in today's world, the technology may make it easier, or they can figure out a way to get more support for analyst events and things like that.
Yeah.
I know, like, not to discourage people or encourage more CMOs to become analysts. I know at least 5 of them. What's your advice to people who want to become a technology analyst? Some of them may have an experience and change careers, and some of them may just want to do it from the beginning. What do you think they should be doing, or how should they think about this career?
I think anybody who has a really deep experience in one particular domain, if you're smart enough and interested enough and kind of agile enough to to stay with the times on how quickly things are moving right now, I would say pick a market category. So if that's AI in the enterprise or UC or customer experience platforms, whatever it is, you really have to genuinely understand the buyer, the vendor landscape, the technology architecture, the business economics. And so that depth is what will make you credible and valuable both to vendors and to buyers. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stick with that one category. I mean, I started as an analyst covering fintech and very quickly broadened that. This was sort of right in the beginning, mid-pandemic. And we noticed some parallels that were happening in fintech that were happening in communication and collaboration platforms. So quickly during the pandemic, both financial services and collaboration platforms had to scale up very quickly. Now, then they had to sort of go fill out that roadmap horizontally because they scaled so quickly. And so just finding those alignments of like actually those two things that you wouldn't necessarily put together actually have a lot of synergies, and those learnings can be transferred from one to the other. Same thing with enterprise applications. The specific use cases might be different, but once you understand the platform, the architecture, and the way that these technologies are being implemented and used, you can grow that. So I think really picking a lane, we call them swim lanes here, picking a lane and really going deep and becoming really an expert in that. And that, like I said, that means understanding the buyer, understanding the vendor, understanding the technology, the architecture, platform. That's really, that would be my suggestion on where to start, but certainly does not limit you to that one swim lane. Once, especially now that we're seeing, I don't know if you're seeing this, but certainly for us, what we've seen is that we used to have one person that covered AI. Now that's impossible. We still have somebody who covers like AI architecture, but if you look across any one of our swim lanes, we all have to understand AI. We all are so deeply embedded in the ever-changing world of AI. I'm seeing the same thing now with security. We used to have somebody who specifically covered security, and I think there's an argument to be made for somebody who covers security vendors. But just like governance and risk and what we were talking about, what I mentioned earlier, we all have to understand that, and we all have to be asking those questions and figuring out where that fits into all of our coverage areas. So if you start in one particular thing, you'll find that it may become broad quite quickly. But
That's
yeah,
true.
I think you're right. I have met other CMOs that have become analysts, and it seems to be a fairly natural path, I think, because CMOs are just inherently embedded into all of the data, plus the messaging, the marketing, how buyers are buying, what the buyer personas are, how they differ, the different kind of outcomes they're looking for depending on which department you're dealing with. So CMOs are typically very across the entire enterprise. They're involved in bits of each part of the organization, and so that gives a really broad view of the organization. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me, and I know a few also, and they're some of my favorites.
That's true. No, these are great thoughts. But hold the thought on categories. I have my own opinion, but I'd like to bring Erin back and we can have a discussion among friends, I think.
Yay.
So, welcome back, Erin.
Thank
One
you.
thing.
Mel and I did not coordinate on outfits today, by the way.
I know, funny. We do match, so good.
Hi, Mel.
Maybe I would have also worn something of the same color.
I know, we should have told you, Sashi. Sorry.
That's true. Mel brought something up that's so important today. Categories are kind of disappearing, I think, if that's what I took from what Mel said. And analysts have to know adjacent subjects. At the same coin, companies also can't stick to one category, because if they are in security, they are also doing observability and they're doing something more. I mean, yeah, like Adobe could be so much more, and it probably is. But without just talking about the companies we work for, how do you think both analyst relations should handle this categoryless world? And you go first, Erin, and then Mel can react to what you say. Like we said, Dreamweaver used to be one category, Cold Fusion used to be another category. But today, like it's customer experience, it's journey orchestration. So as companies change, technology changes, categories will change. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I see both sides of that, right? I mean, we participate in quite a few category specific research every year, but we are seeing within those that the definitions are broadening, right? And to Mel's point, every analyst we engage with is interested in that category technology, but how does AI impact that? How does security and governance impact that? So it can't just be about the category itself. There needs to be almost a broader story, right? You're bringing in other pieces and other elements that impact that category. And so the category by itself becomes broader as well. That's kind of one of the things that we're finding.
That's true. Also, like Mel, you can react to that. Plus, sometimes the buyers also are confused, because they may have several things in their stack that are almost doing the same thing, because one existing software vendor introduced more features that could actually, reduce the tech debt. How are you thinking about this categoryless world? That's my own term.
Yeah, I was going to push back on the word a little bit. I don't think it's categoryless. I think there's just a broader definition of each category. Like I mentioned before, like we can't think about any one category without also thinking about governance and responsible deployment of AI. And these are all like core new criteria. So I think there are some analysts who certainly have a very specific voice on, let's say, one thing I see a lot is there are a lot of analysts who cover specifically contact center. So I wouldn't say that it's categoryless, but those contact center focused analysts now have to also have broad knowledge of AI. They have to have broad knowledge of conversational AI and customer experience. And so I wouldn't say there's no category, but the lines are blurring a little bit. And so I think, have your core competencies, but understand the entire ecosystem around you so that you can really inform both buyers and vendors what that full picture looks like, instead of having like, this is my little corner of the room. I need to know what's going on in the entire building, right?
That's true. I also introduced the term turf blur. All these are on my own blog posts. It's both categoryless and turf blur is for companies moving. These are great points. And in the time that we have, maybe I can ask both of you a question from either side of the table. Like this is more helpful. So, Mel, what are some things that a company can do to have a productive relationship with you?
Early and often. That's my what I like to see is come to me before something launches. Let's look at roadmaps together. Before there's something that could possibly go wrong, let's go through those scenarios. Let's talk often, so that there's a bigger awareness of the whole company and kind of the vision, not just what's happening right now. That I think is the most powerful way to get the most out of analyst engagement, is just to be involved. I'll say it again, early and often.
That's one. What about the other two? I'm just kidding. That's good. I think there's several in that. Erin, what can analysts do better to have a relationship or engagement with AR folks?
I mean, one thing I was just going to add to what Mel was saying, because I agree 100% with that. I mean, we like to say you're bringing the analyst on the journey along with you. So instead of them just being a final, like, we're presenting to you, it's engaging at the earliest stages, getting that feedback, making sure there's that two-way dialogue and bringing them along the journey with you. I think it goes a really, really long way to helping them understand the strategy and what's driving either a new product or a new go-to-market, et cetera, from your company. I think for analysts, they're in a really tough spot, right? Because there is a lot going on, and I think that their jobs are harder than ever. I mean, kudos to both of you, just because the amount of events that you guys go to and that you're invited to, the amount of briefings that you're invited to. I mean, I don't even know how you guys do your jobs. And so I try on the flip side to just stay cognizant of that. You guys are getting asked a lot. And so, even though it may sound like a bad strategy, repetition actually, I think, helps a lot too. Because you guys are getting so much noise and there's just so much coming at you that we have to do a really good job of, and this is part of the going along the journey with you, but like sometimes it means repetition. Like, here's where we're going to go. Here's where we're at. Here's where we told you we were going to go. Here's the momentum and the things that, that happen as a result. There's a lot of connecting the dots along that journey and repeating the narrative, just so it helps you guys stay sort of connected as well.
That's true. Melody, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's great. And when you can back that up too with like, here's what we said we were going to do, here's what we did, and here are the outcomes. Like I said earlier, here's some customers you can talk to. Here's the ROI that was delivered on that. Like, it's, what do they say? Like, say what you're going to say, then say it, and then say what you just said. I mean, it may sound repetitive, but it's actually really just enforcing, like, this is what we said. And maybe sometimes this is what we said we were going to do, and we pivoted, and we did this, and here's why. And oftentimes it's like, hey, we listen to feedback. And so for an analyst to hear that feedback, whether it came from the analyst community or it came from your customers, I love hearing stories like that. Like, this was something that came out of our customers asking for something. And
well, the conversation that you and I had, right? Like, you helped us understand that we needed to make a pivot, and we made that pivot. So making sure that the AR team circles back with the analysts to say, hey, your feedback was so instrumental and it helped us achieve X, Y, Z. Like, I think some AR teams don't do a good job of closing that loop.
Yeah, I think it's great to say where you've been and how you got there, and changes if necessary. And that really helps to understand the whole picture. But also, I think it's a really good indication of how the executives at the company are taking feedback and responding to it. I think that was actually one of the first, at my first Adobe Summit, I asked you, and I think, Blake, do you guys train on feedback? Because all the executives were so good at hearing feedback, even if it wasn't, it's not all positive feedback, right? This has to be a two-way street. And sometimes you're going to say, like, that's not going to land, or that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or, why isn't this better?
Right.
But being able to receive that feedback and showing, like, we were able to make this pivot. It wasn't just, this is my vision and we're marching forward regardless of what we hear. And that's from customers and from analysts. I appreciate seeing that.
Yeah.
A lot of good takeaways from this. I mean, I just want to repeat what you both said. One is early and often. Number two is keep repeating the information. And I'll tell you my own, when you write so much, you almost don't remember what you wrote 6 months ago. So it's always better to say, like, hey, here's where we were. Now, this was really fantastic. I have a personal request. When somebody publishes something, do you expect them to send it to you, or do you just get an alert and say, like, okay, great, an analyst has written about us? What is the best way to let the AR team know that you published something? This is to both of you.
I mean, you're really, really good, Shashi, about sharing when you've published something, and it is super, super helpful. But I don't think all analysts do that. We do have mechanisms to sort of make sure we're seeing the things that are published by the analysts we work with. But sometimes we miss stuff. It's it just depends. So it is helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. Any tips on that?
I don't have tips on that, but I sort of have the same question, because I usually, if I publish something major, I will share it, typically, like publish something on Forbes or on the Moor Insights Strategy page.
Yeah.
But sometimes, just a social post or a small brief, like in our weekly newsletter, I won't send that. And I also don't typically tag the AR team unless they're like in a picture with me, and then, I might tag you then.
Yeah.
And I do see that some analysts do that. Is there, like, do you have any preference on that? And I guess, like, maybe I know the whole AR community talks to each other, and sometimes I see, like, somebody will post something on LinkedIn and they'll tag 12 different executives from the company. My gut on that tells me that the LinkedIn algorithm is going to hide that unless those people engage with it. So I typically don't do that. But if it's helpful for you to know that it's there, I'm happy to do it. But
I mean, I do think it's been helpful when analysts are posting things on LinkedIn that they are tagging the AR folks that they know, because I mean, it then we do go and see it and we can share with executives or whatnot.
Yeah.
If that's easy to do, that is actually helpful.
Yeah. Good to
Thank you both. This has been really wonderful. As always, pleasure seeing you both. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And I'm sure the audience is going to enjoy this. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mel. Good to see you.
You too. Bye.
This has been a Players Productions Network digital broadcast.